I was 3,000 miles away, sitting on a small balcony in Medellin, watching the evening lights come on across the hills, finally breathing without weight on my chest when my phone lit up with her name. I didn't answer. I want to tell you how I got to that balcony. Because it didn't happen by accident. It happened because for 31 years, I believed that being a good husband meant staying quiet. And I stayed quiet so long, I nearly disappeared entirely. My name is not important. What matters is that I was 62 years old, recently retired from 28 years in civil engineering, and I had just watched my wife of 3 decades walk out of our marriage and into another man's arms inside of 40 days. 40 days. I had been gone longer on work assignments, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My wife and I met in our late 20s. She was finishing her master's in business administration. I was building bridges literally for the city of Indianapolis. We were both ambitious, both focused, both certain that we wanted the same things: a home, a family, a life built on something solid. For the first decade, it was good. Not perfect, but good. We had our son, who I will call by what he is to me, my son. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood on the north side of the city. I worked long hours. She climbed steadily in her career, eventually landing in financial consulting for mid-sized firms. We were a functioning unit, but somewhere after the 15-year mark, something shifted. I noticed it first in the way she spoke to me at dinner parties, slightly correcting me in front of others, filling in my sentences with better ones. Small things. Things a man tells himself don't matter. Then it moved into our finances. We had always kept a joint account for household expenses and separate accounts for personal spending. That was the agreement. But around year 18, she suggested consolidating everything. It's just more efficient, she said. I trusted her. She was the financial mind in the household, and I said so. That was my first real mistake, not trusting her, but surrendering my understanding of our own finances entirely. For the next 12 years, I received a monthly summary she prepared. Everything looked fine on paper. We had savings. We had retirement accounts. We owned the house outright, I believed. My pension was solid. We had invested in 2 rental properties in the mid-2000s that I assumed were still generating income. I assumed. That word has cost me more than I care to calculate. The first sign that something was genuinely wrong came about 3 years before the divorce. A letter arrived from a mortgage company I didn't recognize. It was addressed to both of us, but she intercepted the mail before I could look at it closely. When I asked her about it that evening, she said it was a refinancing notice from years ago, already handled. I nodded. I let it go. The second sign came from my son. He had graduated from college and was working in Chicago, doing well in tech sales. We were close, my son and I. I coached his baseball teams, drove him to every camp, every tryout. When he was 17 and struggling in school, I sat with him every night at the kitchen table until his grades came back up. He knew I was his father in every way that mattered. But around the time my wife and I began arguing more openly about her travel schedule, about her coldness, about the growing distance between us, my son started pulling away from me. When I called him, the conversations were short. When I visited him in Chicago, she came with me and dominated every interaction. He spoke to her differently than he spoke to me, more warmly, more freely. I told myself it was just the mother-son bond. I told myself it was normal. I was telling myself a lot of things back then. The marriage ended on a Tuesday in March. I had come home early from a consultation and found my wife in the kitchen on a phone call, speaking in a low, warm voice that I had not heard her use with me in years. She ended the call quickly when she saw me. That night, I asked her directly whether she was involved with someone. She didn't deny it. She said we had been over for a long time and that I had simply refused to accept it. She asked me to move out in my own house, a house I had helped design the renovation for, room by room, weekend after weekend. She asked me to leave. I am not proud of how long I sat in my car in the driveway that night, but I will tell you that when I finally drove away, I drove to a hotel, and I called a lawyer the next morning before I called anyone else. The divorce proceedings took 9 months. She had an attorney who was aggressive and well-prepared. Mine was thorough. During discovery, the first real picture of our finances began to emerge, and it was not the picture I had been shown for the past 12 years. One rental property had been sold in 2019. The proceeds, roughly $214,000 after the mortgage payoff, had moved through two accounts and into a portfolio I had never seen. The second rental had been quietly refinanced twice, pulling out approximately $180,000 in equity. Our joint savings account held $34,000. I had believed it held closer to $210,000. The house I thought we owned free and clear, had a second mortgage taken out in 2018. $160,000. Payments had been made on time, so no letters had become urgent. But the debt existed. I had signed nothing. My wife's name alone was on that refinancing. How that was possible is a question my attorney is still pursuing. In total, the financial picture that emerged was roughly $340,000 lighter than what I had believed our shared wealth to be. My attorney advised me to stay calm and let the process work. I did. The settlement took what it took. I will not say I walked away with nothing, because that is not true. I walked away with my pension, my personal savings, and a check that represented a partial recovery of what had been taken. But I did not walk away whole. Not financially. What I want to tell you is what happened next, because this is the part nobody talks about. I was 61 years old, living in a rental apartment on the east side of Indianapolis, and I had a choice. I could spend whatever years I had left being angry, or I could spend them living. I chose to live. I had always wanted to see South America, not as a tourist, not a 2-week trip with a tour group, but to actually be somewhere. To wake up in a place and learn it slowly. My pension was enough to live modestly outside of the United States. A friend of mine from my engineering days had retired to Medellin, Colombia 2 years earlier. He had sent me photographs, messages, the occasional voice note. "You would not believe how much life is here," he said once. I believed him enough to buy a one-way ticket. I want to tell you about the city before I tell you the rest of the story, because the city matters. Medellin sits in a valley in the Andes, surrounded by green mountains on every side. The weather, year-round, is what locals call eternal spring warm days, cool evenings, air that moves. There is a metro system that works. There are neighborhoods with bookstores and coffee shops and parks where old men play chess in the afternoon. I found an apartment in El Poblado, a safe and walkable neighborhood, for $650 a month. My total monthly expenses, including food, transportation, health insurance, and a Spanish class 3 mornings a week, ran to about $1,800. On my pension alone, I was more comfortable than I had been in the last decade of my marriage. The Spanish class is where I want to slow down for a moment, because something happened there that I did not expect. My teacher was a woman in her mid-50s, patient beyond what I deserved, given how poorly I conjugated verbs. There were 5 of us in the class, 2 other Americans, a German couple, and me. We met every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in a small room above a coffee shop on a cobblestone street. I am not telling you that I fell in love in Spanish class, because that would make this a different story. What I am telling you is that I rediscovered what it felt like to be a person that others genuinely enjoyed being around. My teacher would laugh at my mistakes in a way that was warm rather than mocking. My classmates and I went for lunch after Friday sessions. I told stories. I listened to theirs. I was not a former husband or a disappointed father or a man recovering from financial betrayal. I was just a man learning a language in a beautiful city, and that turned out to be enough. But back to Indianapolis, because the story was not finished there. About 4 months after I had settled in Medellin, my son called me. Not a short call. A long one. He had been visiting my wife, his mother, in Indianapolis, and something had happened that he needed to tell me about. She had gotten engaged. The man's name was not important to me, but my son described him in a way that was meant, I believe, to reassure me. Successful, well-connected, a developer who had built luxury condominiums downtown. He drove a car that cost more than some people's houses. My son had met him 3 times before this trip, and spoke about him the way a man speaks about someone he is trying to convince himself to respect. "He's been good to her, Dad," my son said. And then after a pause, "He's kind of everything she said she needed." I did not respond to that the way I might have a year earlier. I simply asked my son if he was happy. He said he was trying to be. I told him that was enough for now. What I did not tell my son was that a name, once I had it, was something I knew how to research. 30 years in engineering means 30 years of learning how to examine structures, what they show on the surface, versus what is actually holding them up. I started quietly. The developer's professional profile was impressive at first glance. Several completed projects, a firm name, a website with photographs of buildings I could actually find on a map. But when I pulled business filings, which are public record, the structure of his various LLCs was unusual. Projects half completed. Partner names that changed every 2 to 3 years. One firm that had been dissolved following a contractor dispute in 2021. Another that had a lien filed against it by a subcontractor in Louisville. I was not looking to destroy anyone. I want to be clear about that. I was looking because my son was standing next to this man at family dinners. And my son is the most important person in my life. Whatever my wife had done or not done, my son's well-being was not something I was willing to leave to chance. I compiled what I found: business records, court filings, a Better Business Bureau complaint that had been quietly resolved, and I sent it to my attorney, asking her to look at it with fresh eyes. She called me back within a week. Her assessment was that while nothing was definitively criminal, the pattern of financial behavior was, in her words, not something you want your family near. I did not send this to my wife. I did not contact the developer. I shared it with one person, my son, during a phone call that lasted nearly 2 hours. I did not tell him what to think or what to do. I simply said, I want you to know what I know. What you do with it is yours. He was quiet for a long time. Why are you telling me this? He finally asked. Because you're my son, I said. That's the only reason. The wedding was planned for October. I was not invited, which I considered reasonable given the circumstances. My son told me he had agreed to attend as a family member, not in any formal role, which I also considered reasonable. He was trying to maintain his relationship with his mother. I understood that. What I did not expect was the phone call I received from my son the evening after the wedding rehearsal dinner. He had been seated at dinner next to a man he didn't know, a business associate of the groom, as it turned out. The conversation had been normal at first, but at some point, the associate, a few glasses of wine into the evening, had mentioned a property deal, a development project in Carmel, Indiana. He had mentioned that he and several other investors were owed money from the project, that it had stalled, that the developer had been unreachable for 6 weeks. My son had said nothing at the dinner table. He had been polite, finished his meal, and then walked outside and called me. Dad, he said. The guy sitting next to me tonight just described the exact same pattern you showed me. We talked for a long time that night. Not about his mother, not about the wedding, not about any of the years of tension between us. We talked about what a man owes his family versus what he owes himself. We talked about what it means to investigate rather than accuse. We talked, for the first time in years, like two people who trusted each other completely. The wedding happened. I was not there to see it, but I learned, through my son over the following months, that the elegant life the developer had presented began unraveling within weeks of the ceremony. The Carmel project collapsed entirely in November. A civil lawsuit was filed by 3 investors in December. By February, my wife's attorney was making calls to my attorney about assets that had turned out not to exist. The house she had moved into, which she had understood to be his, was mortgaged beyond its value. The investment accounts she had believed were substantial were largely composed of promissory notes that were now in dispute. She had sold our Indianapolis home in the fall, a home that sold for $440,000. That money, her money, legitimately, was now entangled in a legal situation that would take years to sort out. She called me in March, nearly 1 year to the day after our divorce was finalized. I was on my balcony in Medellin. The hills were lit up in the evening. My Spanish, while still imperfect, was good enough now to have full conversations with my neighbors. I had taken up cooking, badly at first, and then, with some modest competence, I had made friends, real ones, the kind you make when you have nothing to prove. When I saw her name on the screen, I sat with it for a moment. Then I answered. She did not apologize. I want to be honest about that. She was frightened, and she was looking for something, reassurance maybe, or information, or possibly just a voice she had known for 3 decades. I listened. I did not offer solutions. I did not say I told you so, though I will admit to you here that the thought moved through my mind and I let it move on through. When she finished, I said, "I hope you find solid ground." I meant it, because here is the thing about justice that took me 62 years and one balcony in Colombia to understand. Justice is not about watching someone fall. It is about refusing to fall yourself. It is about getting up on a Tuesday morning, booking a one-way ticket, learning to order your coffee in another language, and discovering that the version of yourself you abandoned 30 years ago in the name of keeping the peace is still there, waiting. That man, the one I used to be. Before I started disappearing, he is the one who researched the business filings. He is the one who called his son for 2 hours and told him the truth without asking for anything in return. He is the one who answered the phone on the balcony and spoke with quiet dignity to a woman who had taken more from him than she knew. My son visited me in Medellin in April. He stayed for 10 days. We climbed a trail in the mountains above the city. We ate at a place that had been open for 40 years and served the same 3 dishes every day. He learned 5 words of Spanish and was proud of every one of them. On the last night before his flight, we sat on the same balcony where I had answered her call. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, "for some of the things I said a couple of years ago. You were figuring things out," I said. "So were you," he said. That was enough. That was more than enough. I want to leave you with something that my Spanish teacher said to me on the last day of class, when I was struggling to describe what I had been through using words I barely knew. She listened to my broken sentences for a while, and then she said, in slow, clear Spanish that even I could follow, "The man who starts over is not weaker than the man who stays. He is just more honest about what the building actually needs." I did not have the vocabulary to respond in Spanish, so I just nodded. I understood her perfectly. If you are watching this, and you are in the middle of your own version of this story, if you are sitting in your car in your own driveway, or signing papers you never thought you would sign, or watching someone you built a life with choose something you cannot compete with, I want you to hear this directly. You are not starting from nothing. You are starting from everything you learned, everything you built, everything you survived. There is a version of your life on the other side of this that you cannot see yet. Not because it doesn't exist, but because you haven't walked far enough toward it. Keep walking. That is all I have. I am just a man on a balcony in Colombia watching the city lights come on, grateful for every single one of them.